Caitlin Clark's recent performance with the U.S. national team has created a notable discrepancy between individual achievement and team management. After breaking 5 world records in 19 minutes, the decision to subsequently limit her role has drawn significant attention. In professional sports, record-breaking efficiency typically commands an increased role. However, for Clark, the reward for historic production has been a reduction in floor time. The performance against Senegal exceeded the standard expectations for an international debut. In 19 minutes of play, Clark recorded 17 points and 12 assists without a single turnover. Maintaining that level of ball security while facilitating the offense at such a high volume is statistically rare. Her presence on the floor shifted the game's tempo, accelerating the pace and improving the efficiency of the entire U.S. roster. It appeared as though the team's offensive execution reached a higher gear the moment she entered the game. The statistical impact of the Senegal game was unprecedented. Clark set the record for the most assists by any player, male or female, in a Team USA senior national team debut, surpassing the debut totals of players such as Magic Johnson and LeBron James. Furthermore, she established a new FIBA record for assists in any senior national team debut globally. By the time she recorded her 4th record, the most assists by a bench player in tournament history, she had already accumulated 8 assists in the first half alone. While these highlights reached a global audience, the internal team environment appeared to move in a different direction. Despite this performance, the game plan for the following matchup against Puerto Rico shifted away from Clark, while the energy in the arena remained high. Noted by the fact that even the Puerto Rican head coach's daughter carried a sign for Clark, the internal team dynamic seemed strained. The arena was filled with spectators expecting a continuation of the previous night's momentum, yet the atmosphere on the U.S. bench did not reflect that public enthusiasm. A visible tension remained, suggesting a resistance to the attention surrounding the rookie's arrival. On-court analysis from the Puerto Rico game shows multiple possessions where Clark was open in transition, yet the ball was directed elsewhere. During 4 specific sequences, Angel Reese bypassed an open Clark to force plays into crowded lanes or reset the offense. In a high-speed game, missed reads occur, but the frequency of these instances suggested a lack of coordination. This gave the impression of a conscious effort to determine if the team could remain effective without the player who had facilitated their previous win. The tension extended beyond missed passes. A physical exchange occurred between Reese and Clark that appeared unrelated to the immediate play, characterized by many observers as a deliberate shoulder check. For those following the transition of these players from the collegiate level to the national stage, the moment served as a visual indicator that past rivalries may still influence professional dynamics. This occurred within a Team USA environment where personal differences are traditionally secondary to collective goals. While internal dynamics were complicated, the opposition's strategy highlighted Clark's perceived threat. Puerto Rico utilized a box-and-one defense, a hybrid scheme typically reserved for elite scorers such as Stephen Curry. It remains a notable paradox that the opposing team prioritized stopping Clark with a specialized defense while her own coaching staff kept her on the bench for extended periods. Puerto Rico recognized that Clark's rhythm dictated the outcome of the game, a fact her own team appeared hesitant to embrace. Following the game, Coach Kara Lawson described the team's rotations as fact-finding mode. Lawson emphasized a desire for all players to contribute and share the spotlight. However, in a professional sports environment, the decision to dampen the impact of a record-setting performer to maintain group balance is an unconventional approach. When asked directly about Clark's influence on the team's dynamic, Lawson declined to acknowledge the historic nature of the debut. The starting lineup for the next game excluded Clark, and the offense subsequently became stagnant, losing the ball movement that had defined the previous win. This friction has created a visible divide in player body language and fan sentiment. Game film reveals a clear shift in how teammates react when Clark enters the game. While some benefit from the high-quality shots she generates, others appear less inclined to integrate with her style of play. These internal politics are usually kept behind closed doors, but the high level of interest in Clark's career means every pass and interaction is now subject to public scrutiny. For the Indiana Fever in 2026, these events serve as a validation of their specific team-building strategy. Unlike the national team's established hierarchy, the Fever roster is constructed to maximize Clark's skill set. The friction seen on the national team often stems from fitting a generational talent into a pre-existing veteran structure. In Indiana, the organization has aligned its coaching and roster to support a high-tempo offense, prioritizing wins over the management of veteran seniority. The contrast between the Senegal and Puerto Rico games demonstrates the difference between utilizing a generational talent as an engine versus treating them as a secondary piece. When allowed to lead the offense, Clark breaks records and improves the performance of those around her. When marginalized, the game's efficiency declines. While defensive strategies will continue to target her, the records established during this tournament are now a permanent part of international basketball history. The data shows that the game's quality improves when the ball is in the hands of its most efficient facilitator. The primary question moving forward is not whether Clark can compete at this level, but whether the established structures of the sport are prepared to adapt to the speed at which she plays. The records are set, the film has been analyzed, and the influence of this performance continues to shape the future of the game. The broader implications of this tactical friction extend beyond a single tournament cycle and into the structural evolution of the professional game. As the 2026 WNBA season approaches, the data suggests that the league is navigating a transition where traditional seniority is being challenged by the sheer force of market demand and statistical output. The economic reality is that the presence of a single player has fundamentally altered the valuation of the league's broadcast rights, which are currently being renegotiated under a new set of metrics. In 2025, attendance figures and jersey sales reached levels previously unseen in women's professional sports. Yet the internal culture of the sport remains rooted in a hierarchy that often prioritizes tenure over immediate impact. This tension between the old guard and the new economic reality was on full display in Puerto Rico, where the coaching staff's emphasis on sharing the spotlight appeared to be an attempt to manage the social fabric of the team at the expense of its offensive ceiling. From a tactical standpoint, the decision to limit Clark's minutes ignores the gravity she provides on the floor. In basketball analytics, gravity refers to the way a specific player forces the defense to shift even when they do not have the ball. When Clark is on the court, opposing defenses are forced to extend their coverage to the logo, effectively creating a 4-on-3 advantage for her teammates in the paint. By benching her or utilizing a lineup that lacks floor spacing, the coaching staff effectively allows the defense to collapse, making the game significantly more difficult for post players and slashers. The snooze fest described by observers during the Puerto Rico game was not merely a lack of excitement, it was a measurable decrease in offensive efficiency. The team's points per possession dropped significantly during the stretches where Clark was sidelined, a trend that is difficult to ignore when preparing for high-stakes international competition against teams that are increasingly adopting modern, perimeter-oriented strategies. The sociology of the locker room is also undergoing a visible transformation. In professional basketball, the arrival of a rookie who immediately becomes the face of the league often creates a period of professional hazing or veteran resistance. We saw similar patterns during the early careers of players like Larry Bird or Magic Johnson, where established stars were hesitant to cede control to a newcomer. However, in the modern era of high-definition social media and constant film analysis, these interpersonal dynamics are no longer hidden. Fans and analysts now have the tools to track every look-off and every ignored pass in real time. This level of transparency places a new kind of pressure on coaches like Kara Lawson. The fact-finding mode explanation fails to account for the fact that the most critical piece of evidence, the team's improved performance with Clark on the floor, had already been established. When a coach chooses to ignore that evidence to protect the sensibilities of the group, they are prioritizing management over coaching. In Indiana, the front office has taken the opposite approach. Heading into the 2026 season, the Fever roster has been curated to complement a high-volume passing game. The organization has invested heavily in athletic wings who can run the floor and post players who understand how to seal their defenders early to catch a transition pass. Unlike the national team, where the hierarchy is built on years of service, the Fever's hierarchy is built on the scoreboard. The coaching staff in Indiana has recognized that trying to slow Clark down is a losing strategy. Instead, they have leaned into the pace and space model that has revolutionized the men's game over the last decade. This alignment between the front office, the coaching staff, and the primary ball handler creates a level of synergy that the national team currently lacks. It is a blueprint for how to integrate a generational talent without the friction of ego-driven gatekeeping. The international basketball community is also watching these developments with interest. FIBA has long sought to expand the global footprint of women's basketball, and Clark has provided the most effective marketing tool in the organization's history. The record-breaking viewership for the Senegal game was a clear indicator that there is a global audience for a fast-paced, high-skill version of the game. When the U.S. team chooses to play a slower, more traditional style, they are not just missing an opportunity to score points, they are missing an opportunity to grow the sport's commercial base. The disconnect between the marketing arms of the sport, which feature Clark prominently, and the on-court management, which often minimizes her, creates a confusing product for the casual fan. If the goal of the national team is to represent the highest level of American basketball, it stands to reason that the team should be built around its most effective and influential players, regardless of their age or years of service. As we look toward the 2026 WNBA season, the Indiana Fever find themselves in a unique position. They are no longer a struggling franchise looking for an identity, they are the epicenter of the sport's evolution. The Clark effect has led to increased investment in team facilities, dedicated charter flights, and a surge in season ticket renewals that has forced the team to move several games to larger arenas. This commercial success provides a level of job security for the coaching staff and management that allows them to make decisions based solely on performance. They do not have to worry about fact-finding or keeping veterans happy at the expense of the win column, because the fans have already voted with their wallets. The mandate is clear: win games and play the style of basketball that the world wants to see. The resistance seen during the national team cycle is likely a temporary hurdle. History shows that when a player of Clark's caliber enters a league, the league eventually adapts to them rather than the other way around. The physical bumps and the pointed snubs on the court are often the last gasp of an outgoing era trying to maintain its relevance. By 2026, the discussion will likely have shifted from should she be starting to how can anyone stop her. The teams that recognize this shift early will be the ones that thrive, while those that attempt to suppress her impact will find themselves increasingly irrelevant in a landscape that values production over pedigree. The 2026 season will also be a test of the everyone should shine philosophy. In a competitive sports environment, the idea that every player deserves equal billing is often at odds with the goal of winning championships. Elite teams are almost always built on a clear internal structure where roles are defined by ability. When those roles become blurred by political considerations, the resulting product is often less than the sum of its parts. The sluggish performance against Puerto Rico was a textbook example of what happens when a team lacks a clear primary engine. Without the gravity of a dominant playmaker, the offense becomes predictable and easy to defend. The lesson for the rest of the league is that greatness is not something to be managed, it is something to be unleashed. Furthermore, the impact of these events on the WNBA's labor relations cannot be overlooked. As the league's revenue grows, the players are increasingly pushing for a larger share of the profits. Clark's presence has accelerated these conversations, as her commercial value has brought new sponsors and television partners to the table. This has created a complex dynamic where the veterans who are currently testing her on the court are also the ones who stand to benefit most from the economic growth she has triggered. There is an inherent irony in a veteran player shoulder-checking the rookie, whose popularity is responsible for the increase in that veteran's salary and travel accommodations. This economic tension will likely be a major storyline throughout the 2026 season as the league prepares for its next collective bargaining agreement. From a technical perspective, the box-and-one defense used by Puerto Rico will likely become a common sight for Clark in 2026. This defensive scheme requires a high level of conditioning and discipline from the opponent, but it also opens up massive opportunities for Clark's teammates. The Indiana Fever are already preparing for this by developing secondary playmakers who can exploit the 4-on-4 situations that arise when Clark is being face-guarded. In this environment, a teammate who looks off Clark is not just making a personal statement, they are making a tactical error. The successful teams of the future will be the ones whose players are disciplined enough to take the open shot that Clark's presence creates, rather than trying to prove they can score without her. The media coverage of these events has also revealed a generational gap in sports journalism. Older analysts often focus on the dues-paying aspect of the sport, arguing that rookies should wait their turn and respect the hierarchy of the locker room. Younger, data-driven analysts, however, point to the efficiency ratings and the win-loss columns. This divide has turned every Caitlin Clark game into a cultural Rorschach test. To some, she is a disruptive force who is getting too much attention. To others, she is the long-awaited catalyst for the sport's mainstream breakthrough. As we move into 2026, the data-driven perspective is winning out, largely because the financial results are impossible to argue with. Looking ahead, the international schedule leading into the next Olympic cycle will force USAB to reevaluate its selection and management process. The fact-finding mission in Puerto Rico resulted in a close game against an inferior opponent, a result that would be unacceptable on the Olympic stage. The pressure to field the most competitive team possible will eventually outweigh the desire to maintain traditional seniority. If the goal is to maintain American dominance in a world where other nations are rapidly improving, the US will have no choice but to build its system around its most effective players. The 2026 season will be the proving ground for this new reality. In Indiana, the win-finding mission is already well underway. The Fever have spent the offseason refining their transition offense and working on defensive rotations that allow them to get back into the break as quickly as possible. Every drill and every film session is focused on maximizing the number of possessions in a game. They aren't interested in a snooze fest or a balanced distribution of shots that results in a loss. They are interested in high-octane basketball that leverages the unique skills of a player who can pass as well as she can shoot. The contrast between this approach and the one seen during the national team tournament will be one of the most significant narratives of the year. The receipts that fans are collecting on social media are more than just highlights, they are a form of public accountability. In previous decades, a coach could bench a star player and offer a vague explanation with very little pushback. Today, every decision is scrutinized by an audience that has access to the same film and the same stats as the front office. This has created a new environment for coaches like Kara Lawson, who must now defend their tactical decisions to a global audience. The silence that followed Clark's world record performance was not just a missed layup of a question, it was a PR failure in an era where transparency is expected. As the 2026 season begins, the fever is no longer just a trend, it is the new standard for the league. The arenas will be full, the cameras will be rolling, and the pressure will be on every player and coach to perform at a level that matches the hype. The records from the Senegal game are in the books, and they serve as a benchmark for what is possible when the game is played at its highest potential. The anti-Caitlin Clark plan may have provided a moment of control for those who fear change, but in the long run it has only served to illustrate how much the sport needs her. The future of the game is not about managing greatness or protecting hierarchies, it is about keeping up with the speed of a player who has changed the rules forever. Ultimately, the 2026 season will be defined by how the league handles its own growth. The transition from a niche sport to a mainstream powerhouse is rarely smooth, and the friction we are seeing now is a natural part of that process. The cold shoulder and the look-offs are symptoms of a league that is still learning how to embrace its own superstars. However, the scoreboard remains the ultimate arbiter of truth. As long as Caitlin Clark continues to facilitate record-breaking offenses and draw record-breaking crowds, the systems around her will have no choice but to evolve. The era of fact-finding is over. The era of results has begun. The game is faster, the stakes are higher, and the world is watching to see who can keep up. Those who choose to look away will only find themselves left behind in the glare of a talent that refuses to be dimmed. The 2026 Indiana Fever are prepared for this reality, and the rest of the league is quickly realizing that there is no going back to the way things were. The standard has been set, the records are established, and the only remaining question is how many more will be broken before the season is through. The tactical failure in Puerto Rico also highlighted a specific disconnect between the national team's traditional interior play and the modern requirements of a high-volume perimeter facilitator. Historically, the U.S. women's national team has relied on a dominant post presence, often slowing the game down to feed the ball into the paint. This philosophy prioritizes high-percentage two-point shots and physical post positioning. However, Clark's game is built on transition, secondary breaks, and a rapid ball movement cycle that often sees the ball leave her hands before a post player has even established a traditional seal. In Indiana, the roster has been specifically recalibrated to meet this speed. Players like Aaliyah Boston have adjusted their rim running patterns to account for Clark's ability to throw the home run pass from the opposite baseline. On the national team, many of the veteran bigs are accustomed to a slower, more deliberate entry pass, leading to the mistimed connections and lookoffs that were so prevalent in the Puerto Rico game film. This is not just a personality clash. It is a fundamental collision of two different eras of basketball theory. The 2026 season is serving as a testing ground for how long a league can maintain its legacy structures in the face of such a drastic tactical shift. In previous decades, the transition from one style of play to another was gradual, often taking place over the course of several player generations. Clark's impact has forced this transition to occur in a matter of months. The internal resistance seen during the national team cycle is in many ways a defensive reaction from a system that was not designed for a player of her specific gravity. For the veterans on the U.S. roster, the game has always been a linear progression of sets and established hierarchies. Clark's presence turns the game into a chaotic, high-speed series of reads and reactions. When the national team coaching staff speaks of fact-finding and balance, they are essentially attempting to regain control over a game that Clark has made inherently uncontrollable for the defense. This tension is now filtering into the discussions held by the 2028 Olympic Selection Committee. The performance in Puerto Rico served as a high-definition case study in the risks of underutilizing a generational talent. While the U.S. has the depth to win many games through sheer athleticism and talent, the international gap is closing. Teams like France, Australia, and China are increasingly employing modern, pace-heavy systems that mirror the style Clark excels in. If the U.S. continues to prioritize seniority over tactical synergy, they risk a scenario where their internal friction becomes a competitive liability. The selection committee is now facing unprecedented public pressure to ensure that the roster for the Los Angeles Games is built for performance rather than political appeasement. The receipts from 2026 suggest that a team built around Clark's distribution is statistically superior to one that attempts to integrate her as a secondary option. The economic irony of this situation remains a central theme for analysts covering the 2026 WNBA season. The very players who have been seen distancing themselves from Clark on the court are the primary beneficiaries of the Caitlin Clark dividend. The league's transition to full-time charter flights for all teams was directly accelerated by the logistical challenges of managing the crowds Clark draws. The massive increase in the WNBA's media rights valuation is predicated on the viewership numbers she generates. In any other industry, a new employee who increased the company's valuation by several 100% would be given the keys to the organization. In the WNBA, the response has been a complicated mix of professional gratitude and personal resentment. This duality is visible in the marketing campaigns of the league, which use Clark's image to sell tickets, while the internal culture of the sport continues to test her through physical play and social exclusion. Officiating has also become a focal point of the 2026 narrative, as teams like Puerto Rico or various WNBA opponents employ increasingly physical tactics to slow Clark down. The league is under pressure to define what constitutes basketball play versus targeted harassment. The shoulder check from the national team game was a clear indicator that the physicality has moved beyond traditional defensive intensity. Referees are now tasked with managing games where the star player is being shadowed by multiple defenders who are often given more leeway to initiate contact. This has led to a debate over whether the league is protecting its product or allowing a culture of veteran-enforced gatekeeping to diminish the quality of the play. The data shows that when Clark is allowed to play through contact, the game remains high-scoring and engaging. When the physicality is allowed to devolve into a grind, the viewership numbers and the offensive efficiency ratings both suffer. The role of the Indiana Fever front office has been to shield Clark from these distractions by leaning into the data. For the 2026 season, Indiana has implemented one of the most sophisticated analytics departments in the league, focusing on gravity metrics and facilitation efficiency. They have found that Clark's impact is maximized when she is surrounded by 3-and-D specialists who do not require the ball to be effective. This is the exact opposite of the national team's all-star approach, where every player on the floor is a high-volume scorer who expects a certain number of touches. The Fever's success is built on the understanding that one player can be the engine while the others serve as the high-efficiency components. This clarity of roles eliminates the locker room friction that arises when multiple players are competing for the same spotlight. It is a more professional corporate approach to team building that prioritizes the bottom line: wins. As the season progresses, the box-and-one defense is likely to become the standard response for any team facing Indiana. This creates a fascinating tactical challenge for Clark and her coaching staff. To counter this, Indiana has developed a series of sets where Clark acts as a decoy, dragging two defenders to the logo to create a 3-on-4 advantage for her teammates. This requires a high degree of trust and a lack of ego from the rest of the roster. They must be willing to take the open shots and make the simple plays that Clark's gravity creates. This synergy is what was missing during the Puerto Rico game. On the national team, the lookoffs were a refusal to accept the advantages Clark provided. In Indiana, accepting those advantages is the core of the team's identity. The 2026 WNBA season is ultimately a story about the transition of a sport from a niche community to a global entertainment giant. The growing pains are visible on the floor, in the press conferences, and in the social media interactions between players. The anti-Caitlin Clark plan seen in Puerto Rico was a temporary attempt to hold back the tide of this evolution. However, the numbers from that tournament and the subsequent games in the WNBA show that the era of the snooze fest is ending. The game is becoming faster, more skilled, and more focused on individual brilliance as a catalyst for team success. The records established in those 19 minutes against Senegal were not an anomaly. They were a preview of the new standard. Whether the rest of the league is ready to accept that standard remains the defining question of the year. The film doesn't lie. The records are permanent, and the glare of the spotlight is only getting brighter.